It had all started simply, just another adventure to explore a forgotten place. But this time, something far more dangerous was waiting for them. Cheryl's lungs screamed for air as she fought her way through the cold, dark water. Shadows swirled around her, the blurred faces of the Blanchard family reaching out, their ghostly whispers closing in. Her vision was fading, her limbs heavy, but the surface of the water was just out of reach. In a final desperate push, she kicked upward, but it was as if the lake itself refused to let her escape. She felt the icy pull of the manor beneath her, dragging her back toward the depths. But before it all went wrong, the day had begun like any other, with a plan to explore a new and mysterious place. Let's go back to the beginning of the story. Sheryl and Lucas are a young couple who have been engaged for quite some time. Both of them are content creators who frequently travel to Europe to create horror and mystery-themed content. Their passion for uncovering Europe's scary and forgotten corners has led them to countless abandoned castles, ancient ruins, and haunted forests. However, nothing has sparked their curiosity more than the submerged ruins, which have now turned into a man-made lake. Sheryl and Lucas had talked about this lake a while ago, and they decided to explore these submerged ruins further for their next content. The next day, Sheryl and Lucas prepared to go to the location of the submerged ruins in the man-made lake, which, according to the information Lucas had gathered, is located in a remote village in the southwest of France. But upon arriving, Lucas felt disappointed as the lake turned out to be a popular tourist destination. Sheryl, a pragmatic but curious woman, had grown tired of their relentless chase for fear and fame. As they approached the lake, her discomfort grew because the once serene holiday spot was now filled with tourists, whose laughter and splashing water disturbed the quietness she had secretly hoped for. From the beginning, Sheryl wasn't too keen on this trip since it involved vlogging while diving to the bottom of the lake. She felt relieved and suggested to her boyfriend that they take a break from vlogging for a while and enjoy their vacation without worrying about viewers and such. However, Lucas was already very disappointed because he had planned everything meticulously to create captivating content at the bottom of the lake. Lucas believed that this content could boost their channel's viewers and subscribers, which had recently dropped significantly due to viewers finding their content increasingly boring. Thirsty for excitement and validation from their fans, Lucas insisted that they stick to their plan, not just for the vlog, but also for the adrenaline rush that drove him. Sheryl and Lucas decided to stay at an old inn by the lake, where the walls were decorated with faded photographs of the village before it was submerged. That night, while sipping wine on a terrace overlooking the lake, they overheard a conversation between an old man and a group of tourists. Curious about his thick accent and stories about the lake's secrets, Lucas approached the old man and introduced himself as a vlogger interested in the area's history. The old man, who introduced himself as Gervais, revealed that the main part of the lake was just debris and ruins not worth much fuss. Gervais then told Lucas about another branch of the man-made lake, located in a more isolated part of the forest. Gervais added that at the bottom of the man-made lake, there is a house he claims is still intact and perfectly preserved, even after being submerged for 50 years. He called it Le Manoir des Ténèbres, or the Dark Manor. Gervais explained that the Dark Manor is said to be untouched by time and remains in perfect condition, as if it were waiting for something or someone to disturb its eternal slumber. Hearing this, Lucas became excited again about creating content and urged Sheryl to go there with him. Although Sheryl would have preferred to enjoy their vacation without thinking about work, she couldn't ignore the fact that Lucas had invested everything into this trip. Reluctantly, she agreed to go. The next morning, Sheryl and Lucas set off with Gervais as their guide. The path through the forest was narrow and overgrown with trees, their branches twisting like they were reaching out with their hands. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, until all that remained was the sound of their boots crunching on the forest floor and the distant murmur of a river. During the journey, Gervais shared that the area had been artificially flooded around 50 years ago to create a man-made lake that would prevent the severe floods that used to occur repeatedly in the past. The part of the lake that had become a tourist destination only contained broken ruins at its bottom. However, Gervais claimed that the branch of the lake in the middle of the isolated forest offered a breathtaking view because there was a large house still intact at its bottom, something that would make for very interesting content. When Lucas asked about the urban legends of the man-made lake, Gervais explained that the flooding of the village was said to be more than just an engineering project. It was a desperate attempt to cleanse the land of its dark past. Gervais then told them about the Blanchard family, a wealthy and influential family who were also feared by the villagers for their eccentricity and occult practices. According to rumors at the time, the Blanchard family was said to have made a pact with dark forces. When the villagers finally rose against them, it was said that the Blanchard family cursed the land as they perished, binding their souls to the manor forever. However, Gervais dismissed this as just an urban legend, advising Sheryl and Lucas not to think too much about it, as such stories were often made up to attract tourists to their village. When they reached the edge of the lake, the water was very still, its surface looking like polished obsidian. The surrounding forest seemed to form a natural barrier, protecting the place from the outside world. Lucas's excitement was clear, but Sheryl felt a cold fear creeping down her spine. Despite this, she tried to ignore her fear and continued to follow Lucas, her love for him pulling her into this strange and forgotten world. After putting on their diving gear, they plunged into the dark water, where the temperature dropped quickly as they deeper. They continued to dive deeper, following the direction Gervais had given, until they finally found a grand Gothic-style building with spires reaching upwards as if trying to pierce the surface. As Gervais had described, the manor was still intact, yet terrifying, with its stone walls covered in ageless algae. A large wrought iron gate loomed before them, adorned with strange symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. They also found a sign warning that the house was a forbidden area. Since the house had been submerged for years, Lucas and Sheryl chose to ignore the warning and push through the gate. As they swam closer to the entrance, they found the main door tightly locked with a rusty but sturdy padlock. Lucas signaled Sheryl to search for another way in by swimming around the house. Both were amazed by the size of the house, which turned out to be much larger than they had expected. Lucas and Sheryl tried swimming to the upper floor and found a small window in the attic. After first inspecting the interior using a drone, they decided to enter the house. The inside of the manor was just as eerie as the outside. The furniture, cloaked in shadows, seemed to watch them as they moved through the water-filled hallways. Portraits of the Blanchard family, with their vacant, accusing eyes, adorned the walls. At that moment, Sheryl felt the weight of those stairs, a sensation that grew with each step deeper into the house. She also began to notice flickering movements at the edge of her vision and heard the sound of footsteps that couldn't possibly be real. Shortly after entering the house, Sheryl began hearing strange noises. However, Lucas assured her that the motion sensors on their drone had not detected any movement, proving there was nothing or no one there besides the two of them. Meanwhile, in one room, they discovered a collection of photographs, each depicting a different family member. Sheryl shivered when she noticed a recurring motif, a small skull pendant with intricate carvings worn by every family member. The same symbol was repeated in a sort of shrine in one corner, surrounded by candles that, impossibly, seemed to flicker as if they had just been extinguished. As they moved further into the house, they entered a children's bedroom, where an antique doll lay on the bed, its eyes gleaming with a sinister light despite the years. On the wall, there were crude drawings that appeared to depict a demonic figure, its claws stretched out as if reaching for something or someone. There was a sense of fear in the room, a feeling of pressure tightening around Cheryl's chest as she examined the drawings more closely. However, she once again ignored her fear, not wanting to disappoint Lucas. After exploring the upper floor to his satisfaction, Lucas suggested they dive down to the lower levels of the house. As they swam down to the lower level of the manor, the atmosphere suddenly grew heavier, the water colder and thicker, as if filled with the lingering despair of those who once lived there. They soon found what appeared to be a dining room, with a long table still set as if for a feast. The chairs were pulled out, as though the guests had just stood up and left in the middle of their meal. However, it was the deep, desperate scratches on the walls that caught Cheryl's attention. Scratches in the stone that led toward a large fireplace at the far end of the room. As they approached the fireplace, an inexplicable sound suddenly echoed through the water. A faint melody, like a piano being played somewhere deep within the mansion. The motion sensor on the drone detected movement in the next room, and Lucas, eager to capture evidence of paranormal activity, pulled out a small knife as they moved toward the sound. Entering what looked like a kitchen, Sheryl and Lucas found a door blocked by a large crucifix statue. Driven by curiosity, they opened it and entered a room filled with equipment commonly used for filmmaking in that era. They also discovered that the walls of the room were covered with photos and newspaper clippings about children who had gone missing from nearby villages. Seeing this, Sheryl instantly felt a wave of nausea as she realized the horrifying truth. The house was a place of terror, not just for the Blanchard family, but for everyone who crossed their path. As they explored the room further, Lucas and Sheryl were shocked to find two bodies chained and hanging above a pentagram carved into the stone floor. The water around them had darkened with age, and the bodies were preserved in a strange state of partial decay. Sheryl and Lucas could only guess that these unfortunate souls were sacrificed in some unholy ritual before the mansion was submerged. Shortly afterward, they were startled by a door that suddenly creaked open behind them, revealing a small, dark corridor. Driven by curiosity and the need for more footage, Lucas swam toward it without a second thought, while Sheryl reluctantly followed. Inside, they found jars filled with preserved body parts, each labeled with dates corresponding to the disappearances of the children. At the same time, the air, or what felt like air in that suffocating space, was thick with malevolence. Realizing this, Sheryl shouted at Lucas to leave. But Lucas had already gone too far, his obsession blinding him to the danger around them. As they tried to escape, they found their way out blocked. The window they had used to enter had been sealed from the outside, as if the house itself refused to let them leave. Panic began to set in as their oxygen levels decreased. Cheryl's mind raced with possible solutions, but they all seemed impossible against the supernatural force at work. As they searched for another way out, the house seemed to come alive. Shadows twisted into strange shapes, and the paintings on the walls changed, the faces of the Blanchard family turning into expressions of anger and pain. They heard whispers in the water, voices calling to them in a language they couldn't understand. Sheryl quickly panicked, feeling trapped inside the house, while Lucas tried to calm her down and urged her to keep looking for another exit, especially after Sheryl saw the ghost of a woman trying to attack her. Strangely, all the windows in the house were incredibly difficult to break. Sheryl then remembered a gap in the basement where the two bodies had been chained. They rushed back there. However, when Sheryl arrived in the basement, she found that both of the chained corpses had disappeared, and Lucas was nowhere to be seen. Fear filled her as she realized they were not alone. The curse of the noble family was real, and the Blanchards had risen to claim new victims. At the same time, Sheryl felt something invisible attacking her. As she tried to escape, she became entangled in chains with hooks, causing deep wounds and significant blood loss. In her panic, Lucas finally appeared and immediately comforted her, explaining that he had been searching for another way out in a different room. Sheryl then told Lucas about the two corpses that had suddenly disappeared. But when they went to check, to their surprise, the bodies were back in their original place. Sheryl was certain she hadn't been hallucinating. The bodies had indeed vanished when she was alone in the room. Lucas, still in denial that anything unusual was happening in the house, felt curious and removed the masks that were used for medieval torture from the two corpses. They immediately recognized the faces of the corpses from the family portraits of the Blanchards, the owners of the house, which they had seen when they first entered. Suddenly, the corpses came back to life and started chasing them through the house. Fortunately, they managed to escape. Lucas and Sheryl then tried to leave the house through the chimney, but the opening was too narrow. The walls collapsed, causing them to become separated and trapped on different floors. Lucas, trapped on the upper floor, tried to find a way out and search for his girlfriend. While in a bedroom, he accidentally found the Blanchard family tree, revealing that Gervais was the youngest son of the Blanchard family. Lucas realized that Gervais had deliberately lured them into his family's sunken home, but he didn't know why. Using the drone's tracking device, Lucas finally located Sheryl and hurried toward her. However, he was suddenly attacked by another corpse, whom he recognized from the family tree and photos as Antoinette, the Blanchard family's daughter and Gervais's older sister. Meanwhile, on the lower floor, Sheryl swam with all her strength, desperately trying to escape the pursuing undead, until she finally managed to find Lucas. She quickly told him that they needed to hurry out of the house and swim to the surface of the lake because their oxygen supply was running low. But Lucas, who seemed strange and different, completely ignored Cheryl's words. Instead, he instructed Sheryl to follow him. Despite her fear, Sheryl reluctantly followed Lucas. Her fear grew even more when Lucas led her to a room she had never seen before, an ancient chapel deep within the mansion. The walls were covered with faded tapestries depicting gruesome rituals, and in the center of the room stood an altar made of black stone. It turned out that Lucas had been possessed by Antoinette, and through Lucas, Antoinette played an old video showing events from 50 years ago, when her entire family was still alive. The video revealed that 50 years ago, the Blanchard family kidnapped children from the surrounding villages to use as sacrificial offerings. They brutally murdered and dismembered the children's bodies as offerings to the demon they worshipped. Because of these cruel acts, the enraged villagers finally executed the Blanchard family to avenge the deaths of their children. However, Gervais Blanchard managed to escape and has remained alive until now. After the massacre of the Blanchard family, the demon they worshipped cursed the family, along with the land and the house they lived in. Because of this, the villagers immediately sealed the house to prevent anyone from entering, believing that the Blanchard family still needed sacrifices to serve the demon for eternity. After revealing all of this, Antoinette manifested before Sheryl and began to spread terror. Under Antoinette's influence, Lucas tried to convince Sheryl to join the Blanchard family in eternity, but Sheryl firmly refused and immediately tried to escape from the chapel. Sheryl grew increasingly panicked as her oxygen supply dropped to just 2%. While trying to escape, she found a small opening leading outside, but Lucas, still under Antoinette's control, continued to chase her, trying to kill her. In her attempt to save herself, Sheryl managed to wound Lucas with his own pocket knife, which luckily brought him back to his senses. However, before they could escape together, Antoinette reappeared and stabbed Lucas to death. After Lucas died, Antoinette and the rest of the Blanchard family tried to capture Sheryl to force her to join them in eternity. The Blanchard family managed to catch up to Lucas and tried to kill Sheryl. With the last of her strength and oxygen almost depleted, Sheryl finally broke free from the ghosts of the Blanchard family and escaped from the home of the devil worshippers. She used all her remaining energy to swim to the surface. However, despair began to creep into her heart as the distance between her and the water's surface seemed to grow further, despite her swimming as hard as she could. Every movement became slower, every breath heavier, and her vision began to blur from the lack of oxygen. The surface, which once seemed so close, now felt unreachable, pulling her back into the darkness. Sheryl could feel her body weakening, her arms and legs, which had been flailing moments before, now starting to stiffen. Her mind was torn between the desire to survive and the reality that her body could no longer fight. In an instant, the terrifying image of the Blanchard family reappeared in her mind, haunting the last remnants of her fading consciousness. Suddenly, a sharp pain stabbed her chest as her lungs desperately struggled for air that wasn't there. She choked, and cold water flooded into her lungs, filling her body mercilessly. Her body began to sink, pulled down by the cold, relentless water. Slowly, Sheryl felt herself becoming heavier, as if the world around her had turned into a black hole, swallowing everything. Her vision went completely dark. The sound of the rushing water around her began to fade, and a strange feeling of peace crept into her mind. In her final moments before losing consciousness completely, Sheryl felt only one thing: relief that her suffering was over. Her body sank deeper to the bottom of the lake, disappearing beneath the calm surface while the world above continued to turn as if nothing had happened. All that remained was emptiness, impenetrable silence, and eternal darkness.